Hello and welcome to the University of East Anglia. My name is Ra Mason and I'm presenting this for the Akita International University Research Showcase 2024. So the title of my presentation is Tracing the Money Trail, Okinawa as a Key Site of Regional Economic Competition. And this research project and the paper that comes from it is part of my forthcoming book, which is from the Agenda Publishing Flashpoint series entitled Okinawa Military Bases, Occupation and Great Power Competition over the Keystone of the Pacific. Hopefully you can find that in good academic bookshops or libraries from the start or near the start of 2025. So what am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about specifically the political economy of Okinawa and why that is significant in terms of Okinawa being a flashpoint in the East China Sea and also in the Indo-Pacific region more broadly. So I'll give some context. I'll also give you a little bit of history of the base economy since 1945 and the influence of big business, specifically construction, concrete and gravel, which are key industries on Okinawa, in addition to things like tourism and the bases themselves. The competing commercial interests, so how different parts of the political economy on Okinawa compete and as a result of that produce different kinds of policies, some of which are unfortunately not very inclined towards reducing conflict and conversely escalate certain kinds of tensions on Okinawa and through the first island chain within which it sits. I'll also talk a little bit about the economic costs of an environmental flashpoint, which Okinawa also is, and talk about the economic diversification and vulnerability of Okinawa and compare that somewhat with Taiwan as a state or statelet, certainly with a historical independent identity, which offers some pathways towards what might be a more peaceful and prosperous future rather than the doom and gloom of conflict. And I'll bring all that together in the conclusion. So to begin with, in terms of context, Okinawa has obviously been a base economy for a long time in terms of the historical reasons for that. We have the impact not only of US military bases but also of Japan's self-defense force bases, a larger and increasing number of which are stationed on Okinawa's main island, as well as the outlying Okinawa islands of the Sakishima Island cluster and the Yaeyama Island cluster, in addition to the islands going up towards mainland Japan, the Amami Islands, on the way to Kyushu. So there are various competing commercial industries which act in relation to the bases, but also which offer areas of synergy beyond them in areas like science and technology, tourism and ecotourism and so on. So it's really looking here at how we have a very complex economy on one island prefecture of Japan, which has a rich kind of political and cultural history, which actually enables or may enable different kinds of solutions to be found to very pressing problems where you have great powers pushing up against each other. So clearly a need to reduce the vulnerability and to also increase the resilience of this as an entity. In other words, to provide Okinawa with a means by which to continue to forge its own independent identity, whilst at the same time remaining part of Japan's sovereign territory. And that involves specialization and diversification. So we need to think a little bit about where the economy came from in order to think about how we can move the economy forward. The base economy itself sprung up really in the aftermath of the Battle of Okinawa. So 1945, Okinawa faces horrendous tornado of steel, so called, as the US Army and the Japanese Imperial Army fight it out in one of the bloodiest battles of World War II, and this results in devastation of the island. It also results in, as you can see from these pictures, that what was once a simple kind of farming and fisheries, primary industry-based economy became largely a base economy, in the sense that construction of bases was something that the Americans did tactically in order to prepare Okinawa as a launch pad to potentially invade mainland Japan, but it created a range of industries which spurred post-war growth to a certain extent. And of course, at that time there was limited choice. Devastated economy, people were on the verge of starvation, so there was only so many industries that could realistically be engaged with in order to generate income for living and for growth more broadly. So in that respect, the immediate post-reversion era, which came after that, so Okinawa reverted back to Japanese rule in 1972, and post-reversion we saw a long period of expansion, but mostly through industries that invested in Okinawa from outside of the prefecture. So there were a certain amount of jobs and other economic opportunities that were created through this, but a lot of the wealth was drawn back to the center, i.e. to Tokyo or elsewhere on the main Japanese archipelago. And this betrayed the expectations that Okinawans, of course, had, who were hoping not just to relieve themselves from some of the more direct security risks that were posed by hosting American bases, but also to catch up with the Japanese miracle economy as it was then. And so the idea was to become so-called hondonami, or in line with mainland Japan, and that was something that became increasingly difficult to achieve as these large corporations from mainland Japan penetrated the Okinawan economy and pushed local indigenous industries out of the market, because there was no longer a tariff barrier that had previously been there when the Americans were governing the island. So ironically, it was in some respects the reversion itself which changed the economic landscape and enabled big business from mainland Japan to dominate the Okinawan economy. And the industries that dominated it most of all, of course, were construction industries, so particularly construction itself, concrete, gravel, these kinds of things. And if you go to Okinawa now, you will see everywhere that concrete is all over the place. For an island which is so-called Hawaii of Japan, and it very much is a beautiful paradise-type island, you can see that highways and bridges and all kinds of development have been developed, and that this is also used as a political tool by the central government, because they're able to either invest or de-invest in the prefecture or increase and decrease budgets in order to garner support from local government on Okinawa and limit its ability to resist domination from the government in Tokyo. So along with that, you also have an environment of relatively pacified community. That's to say that the local population do not generally powerfully resist what is being done by the local government, although there is limited opposition. And so concrete-based development is somewhat rampant. Amidst that, you also have different kinds of competing commercial interests. And of course, you have the territorial dispute of Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, disputed between China, Taiwan, and Japan, all of which would claim these islands. And there is fisheries, there is oil, there are other economic interests that relate to these islands, but also they are administered from Okinawa. And so in that respects, there are some areas in which the increasing competition for power, the geostrategic competition for power more broadly going on around Okinawa, particularly between the United States, Japan, and China, can be influenced by the claims to these islands. And for example, by economic measures taken by the Communist Party of China or other authorities which would seek to leverage some kind of political gains for the sake of economic advantage or the sake of economic interests, which obviously drive many of the policy issues. At the same time, this is not just a geopolitical and economic flashpoint. Okinawa also represents an environmental flashpoint, devastating effects to Okinawan beaches as a result of rapid industrialization on mainland Asia. And it has a very fragile ecosystem, given that it has beautiful coral reefs, virgin beaches, and various environmental treasures, if you like, buried across and around the islands. And so, as much as issues of basing and concerns of economic and political issues around those or related to them are important, in some respects it has been the environmental degradation on Okinawa which also brings to the fore these other issues, because there is limited space and there is limited ability to maximize the amazing potential of tourism and other industries, considering the levels of pollution. And this is something that's been exacerbated by that economic development, particularly driven by Okinawan businesses that I pointed to a moment ago. So there is an irony here that, on the one hand, US bases are the cause of Okinawa becoming a geostrategic flashpoint, but at the same time, it is indigenous Okinawan agency which drives much of the environmental degradation, as well as the large amounts of pollution that wash up from the mainland. So you have the political, the economic, and the environmental, and you certainly have economic drivers when it comes to the political and environmental issues, hence this focus on the economy. And so what I would like to do in the final part of this presentation is to present the promotion, really, of diversification and means by which to reduce vulnerability. And I think some important comparisons can be made with Taiwan and Taiwan's skillful use of various interests in order to diversify and drive its broad-based economy. So you have vested interests, of course, and you have limited geographical space, which is constrained by a number of not just local interests, but of course by the Japanese self-defense forces and also by the American military, who take up a lot of that space. So that's one of the main challenges. But you also have some very innovative developmentalist strategies. And so whether this be sports tourism or ecotourism or scientific exploration or special fishing zones, there are a whole range of industries on Okinawa which actually, driven by and including 7 full universities and a number of research facilities, offer the base from which to create an economy that might be comparable to something like Taiwan, even without the political independence and structures that Taiwan possesses. So there is also a sense in which, as China's strength grows, Okinawa has increasingly powerful claims to legitimacy in terms of being historically an independent state. And so there is an opportunity, if it is careful how it frames that identity in relation to particularly Japan and the United States, and avoids antagonizing both its own government, national government in Tokyo, and the State Department and others in the United States. If it's able to avoid antagonizing it with political language, it may be able to carve out an economic space in which it operates in some respects similarly to its past iterations as an independent trading hub, and also uses lessons it can learn from Taiwan as a very diverse and successful economy without full recognition as a state, as a model to emulate. And so in that respect, there is an attempt to sort of fortify Okinawa and to also demonize the regime in Beijing by Japanese and American central governments. But the Okinawan local authorities, the prefectural government, is able to somewhat temper those initiatives and also to promote trade, sports, tourism as means by which to improve regional relations and stabilize the situation in the East China Sea, including in and around those Senkaku Diaoyu Islands that we mentioned. So Okinawa potentially has a very powerful and important role to play in the future of the region. So as a conclusion, well, I would say several key things need to be observed. One is that economics plays a key role in situating Okinawa as a political flashpoint and also as the centre for geostrategic rivalries. But it also illuminates the ways in which we might try and push Okinawa towards reinventing its own identity whilst maintaining its Japanese nationality as it stands. And by doing so, therefore providing the basis and political legitimacy through which to develop a flourishing, diverse economy and promote broader peace and prosperity in the region. And so the prefectural authorities are really going to have to lead that project. Currently, the prefectural authorities are led by Tamaki Denny, who you see in the top right of the picture here, who's the prefectural governor, and he has an entourage and close links to local businesses who are all very much on board with the idea of promoting Okinawa as a bastion of peace, prosperity, and also of environmental and scientific discovery. So great opportunity, and it goes along with lots of soft power initiatives, things that are around music, around sport, around other events, and the hosting of different kinds of initiatives, events, and activities on an island which has a beautiful environment, lovely warm seas, fantastic opportunities for people to visit from far further and in far greater frequency than they currently do. So it's all about framing the current disputes and reducing tensions on the islands and around the islands, framing issues in a manner which allow positive growth and the development of broader regional relations. That, for now, is that. Thank you very much indeed.